This morning, in the follow-up to yesterday's meeting between Prime Minister and President Xi Jinping, the two leaders had another conversation of almost 90 minutes on a one-to-one basis. And that was followed up with talks at the delegation level between the two delegations, followed by Prime Ministers hosting a lunch in honor of President Xi Jinping and his delegation. So in all, the two leaders have had 6 hours of direct discussion on a one-to-one basis. You would have seen the media remarks made by both leaders at the delegation level talks. The Prime Minister has spoken of the Chennai Connect as a follow-up to the Wuhan spirit. And while I'm sure you have also carefully followed the remarks made by President Xi to the media, I wanted to flag some of the points that he had made. He felt that Prime Minister had sincerely welcomed him to India. He spoke of the informal summit as having produced visible progress. He described his experience in India as a memorable one and that he had enjoyed discussions with the Prime Minister. And both President Xi Jinping and the Prime Minister have conveyed their appreciation to the government, the state government of Tamil Nadu, for the excellent arrangements, including the very grand welcome that President Xi Jinping received him and his delegation. The discussions focused on what had happened after the Wuhan summit in the past approximately year and a half. And both leaders have agreed that many of the dialogue mechanisms which have been formed or which have been reformed since the Wuhan summit have created a very good momentum in the relationship, and that the engagement between India and China across all sectors has intensified. They also agreed that strategic communications have deepened and that this should be continued, and both leaders have therefore agreed that the informal summit provides a very good platform for the leaderships to engage, and President Xi Jinping endorsed the idea that we should continue these informal summits between the leaders of India and China in the future. There was a good conversation on trade. As you know, this is an issue which has been of concern here back home. And President Xi Jinping, after hearing out our Prime Minister on this issue, said that China is ready to take sincere action in this regard and to discuss in a very concrete way how to reduce the trade deficit. Now, one of the important understandings that the two leaders reached, therefore, was that a new mechanism will be established to discuss trade, investment and services. This will be at an elevated level. From the Chinese side, it will be the Vice Premier. His name is Mr. Hu Chunhua. From the Indian side, it will be the Finance Minister of India, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman. The decision on when and how this mechanism is to be activated will of course be done now through diplomatic channels. This is not something the leaders go through. And President Xi Jinping also then welcomed investments from India into China, including in the information technology and pharmaceuticals sectors. The two leaders also agreed that they should explore through this new mechanism the possibility of establishing manufacturing partnerships. And Prime Minister suggested that both sides could identify certain sectors, certain specific industries where investment could come in and where manufacturing would help create employment, create jobs, and enhance the market for both sides. Obviously, when trade is being discussed, one of the issues briefly touched on forming a common regional trading agreement. And Prime Minister specifically said in this regard that India looks forward to this, but that it is important that RCEP is balanced, that a balance is maintained between trade in goods, trade in services and investment. And President Xi noted this and said that China and India are ready to discuss this further and that Indian concerns will be taken into account. It was a brief discussion, but it is an important point. President Xi raised the issue of engaging more on the defense and security side. He said that there was a brief review of the ongoing exchanges and cooperation, after which the President of China said we need to step up engagement in this area. This will enhance mutual trust between the two militaries and the security forces. And they have extended an invitation to the Raksha Mantri, our defense minister, to visit China. Again, the dates, the timing, and so on will be discussed through diplomatic channels. The two leaders had a fairly long discussion on people-to-people relations, and both Prime Minister and President Xi agreed that we need public opinion in both countries to broad-base the relationship that we have between India and China. And to this extent, under this rubric, a number of issues were discussed. The first, of course, being the 70th anniversary of India-China relations next year. We have agreed that 70 events will be celebrated, 35 on each side. This has been more or less decided what sort of events these will be. And in effect, it means that there will be at least one event each week in the anniversary year, either in India or in China. And both leaders agreed that this sort of intensive propagation of the public side of the relationship should in fact lead to public opinion on both sides being engaged in the relationship. The Prime Minister also specifically proposed that we need to give greater emphasis on tourism in both directions, and he felt that the 70th anniversary of China's liberation, which was just celebrated this year, and the 75th anniversary of the independence of India would be the two milestone years in which we should look to significantly enhance tourism from the existing levels to a new level. And in that regard, the Prime Minister also suggested that in order to enhance P2P contact between the public in both sides, we should also look, among other things, at homestay. And President Xi Jinping gave a positive response to this particular suggestion. President Xi spoke of greater facilitation for yatris going to the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, and Prime Minister suggested a number of ideas on the connect between the state of Tamil Nadu and the Fujian province of China. This was the province in which the city of Quanzhou is located, where recently, or in the last decade or so, Tamil inscriptions and fragments of a temple, Shaivite temple, have been discovered, and where there is now increasing evidence that traders from Tamil Nadu as well as from other parts of southern India actually established communities. Therefore, among the various ideas is joint research on how we can explain to our own public this connect that is there between the Tamil Nadu and Fujian. There was a decision to establish sister state relations between Tamil Nadu of India and Fujian of China, and various other initiatives in this regard. The idea is that we also strengthen the connection between southern India and China in the same way that Buddhism was a connect between the northern part of India and China. There was some discussion on international and regional issues. Both President Xi and Prime Minister emphasized the importance of both countries having independent and autonomous foreign policies. President Xi said that in the light of this, both sides need to have many more intensive discussions, promote understanding, understand each other's perspective on major global and regional issues. They both agreed that it is important to strengthen a rules-based order in the international trading system, that the World Trade Organization is a central pillar of the global trading system, and that in the process of reform, both sides should work together. Both sides have also had a brief exchange on climate change, on the responsibilities that Government of India and China are taking in enhancing our own consciousness towards environmental protection and climate change. Both have also agreed that we need to maintain a closer contact on international issues and on regional issues, and among these, some of them discussed included Afghanistan. Finally, President Xi Jinping has invited Prime Minister to China for the next informal summit. This will obviously be at a mutually agreed time, and the Prime Minister has accepted this invitation with pleasure. So I would certainly sum up the events of the last 2 days in the following way. In the first place, there was excellent discussion between the two leaders, and what has come out of this summit is the role of leadership in both countries in steering our relationship into a forward-looking direction. Both Prime Minister and President Xi Jinping mentioned that we need to look to the future. Secondly, Prime Minister's description of the outcome as Chennai Connect in the follow-up to the Wuhan spirit. Thirdly, both sides agreed to consolidate strategic communications, to enhance it at all levels, to talk and share about any issues that we have, to build mutual trust, including between the militaries. Fourthly, we agreed that there would be greater understanding shown on trade relations and on our sensitivities relating to trade. We would try to find a way forward in addressing the trade deficit. A new mechanism at an elevated level would be created in order to talk about trade issues. Fifthly, we both agreed that it was important to deal with the challenges of terrorism and radicalization in an increasingly complex world and where our own societies were diverse, and both leaders were leaders of countries which were not only large in terms of area and population, but also in terms of diversity. Lastly, but not the least, there was a new focus on people-to-people relations, an understanding between both leaders that the public in both countries, and we constitute between the two countries 2.7 billion people, the public of both countries need to be brought into the relationship, that the relationship needs to be predicated on how the public benefits in both countries, and a number of ideas were exchanged on how we can build P2P relations. Obviously, it now falls upon the official levels, the two foreign ministries, the other departments of the government of India and their counterparts in China to concretize the outcomes of the Chennai summit and to see how we can carry this relationship forward. But I will only conclude by saying that prior to his departure, just a very short while ago from the summit venue, the President did convey to Prime Minister that he was very satisfied with the discussions. He enjoyed talking to the Prime Minister. He looks forward to receiving the Prime Minister in China next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I'll take the first set of 3 questions. Yes, please. No, behind Abhishek. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. Foreign Secretary, my name is Anshul Vora with Al Jazeera, and I'd like to ask you if you could provide us more details on what sort of assurances has India got when it comes to the trade deficit in the pharmaceutical and others. Is Indian companies get more access to Chinese markets or not? Because this issue has been discussed many times, but we don't really know what sort of progress has been made. So has any assurances been made? And just very briefly, the second question, if Kashmir in any way was raised or not, because some analysts have said that this visit was actually overshadowed by the events in Kashmir, and China and India have not agreed on the recent decision taken by the Indian government.
Thank you. Abhishek?
So this is Abhishek from Republic TV. Just to add to Achal's question on Kashmir, were we able to communicate to the Chinese side about our not liking the manner in which they have conducted themselves, even being provocative on the issue of Kashmir? And do we have, or do the Chinese have better appreciation of Pakistan's role in Kashmir?
Thank you. Geeta?
Geeta Mohan with India Today. The question is on radicalization. A lot of discussion on radicalization and terrorism. Were there specific areas that Prime Minister Narendra Modi raised with regards to Pak-based terrorists and terrorism emanating from Pakistan?
Thank you.
Thank you. Achal, obviously when such issues are discussed at leadership level, the leadership does not go into details. It sets the direction. And it has, in this case, not merely set a direction, it has also decided to establish a mechanism at high level to talk of how we can balance trade. So in this regard, I think it is a very positive development that has taken place. From our side, the Finance Minister, and from the Chinese side, the Vice Premier will now meet. I presume during those discussions, specific details will be discussed on how our trade deficit will be addressed. Since both Achal and Abhishek referred to Jammu and Kashmir, I would like to state quite categorically that this issue was not raised and not discussed, and therefore there is no question of my making any further comments on the matter. In any case, the Government of India's position, as expressed publicly, is very clear. This is a matter that concerns the internal affairs of the country. Geeta, as far as radicalization and terrorism is concerned, as you know, the objective of the informal summit is to have an overarching discussion on a strategic plane. And I think the leadership societies like ours, which are not unitary societies, on how we should work together to combat it. There were no specific discussions of any kind as to, but the global threat that was there, including from ISIS and Daesh, were discussed. But again, a detailed discussion is not possible. They had a number of events and a number of issues to cover. And in that context, the main point that was agreed by the two sides is that for a country like China and a country like India, increasing radicalization is something which is in neither's interest. Well, of course, since Prime Minister Imran Khan had visited China, the President of China talked about his visit.
Thank you. Nainima?
This is Nainima Basu from the print. Just want to understand also on trade, were there any discussions on services trade, relaxation of visas for Indian professionals? And also on defense cooperation, has the Chinese side offered any platforms in terms of warships, fighter jets, anything like that? If you can shed the light.
Thank you. Indrani?
Foreign Secretary, you said that there was visible progress that between Wuhan and Chennai. If you could detail what you consider to be visible progress between the two
Thank you.
countries.
One more. Sandeep?
Foreign Secretary, about 3-4 years ago, a government source had said that advances in technology had will lead to incorporation of new confidence building, new elements to the confidence building measures for peace and tranquility on the border. So could you tell us what are the new technologies that have come up and whether more additions were made?
Thank you. Nainima, as I have already said on the trade side, this new mechanism that has been established will discuss such issues, including the question of relaxation in visas and so on. This is not a discussion that is normally done at the leadership level. As far as defense is concerned, gone into at the leadership level, so I will be unable to. Indrani, as far as what you talk about details of the visible progress, I think we should recognize that since the Wuhan summit, at the political level, there have been significant exchanges. At the economic and trade levels, there is a greater recognition by China, and to that extent, we have been able to put on the table that the trade deficit is an economically sustainable one, and it is also something which is sensitive to our domestic industry. And I think there, the fact that President Xi Jinping understood this was a concern, said that China will be ready to address the trade deficit, and actually proposed a mechanism, I would say this is visible progress on the trade side. On the people-to-people side, there are a number of new proposals as well. Sandeep, as I explained, on the issue of the boundary question, there was a general sense by both leaders that peace and tranquility has been maintained, that we need to strengthen it. I had already in my pre-summit briefing indicated that both sides are discussing new confidence building measures in the light of new technology, but obviously this is not something discussed at leadership level, and therefore as and when these additional CBMs are agreed to, we will move ahead on that. One point I did forget to mention, both leaders have also agreed that the special representatives will continue to meet. Again, when they meet, the dates on which they meet, where they meet, are something that is decided through diplomatic channels.
Thank you. Yes, please.
A few years back, China showed interest to set up a new consulate general in Chennai. So what's the status of it? Was it discussed in this venue?
Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Devapriyan from News 18, Tamil Nadu.
Thank you.
Sir, Maha Siddiqui from CNN News 18.
Sir, did India express its concerns over cross-border terrorism from Pakistan, considering there is perceived backing of China for Pakistan, and China being the president of FATF, the question of blacklisting of Pakistan is going to come up. Was that touched upon? Did China say anything about that and not backing Pakistan there?
Just a small note, FS has already shared what was discussed. And I think asking whether this was discussed or not, I think it doesn't make much sense. So if you have any different question, then I think I would appreciate. Yes, please. Sridhar.
So you mentioned that, India sought, both countries sought greater understanding on the issue, on the part of each other, on the issue of trade. But what about the greater understanding of the Indian concerns of Pakistan, terrorism emanating from Pak soil, and also of Indian concerns over the recent Sino-Pak joint position on Kashmir? Have we sought a greater understanding of the Indian position from China?
Maha and Sridhar, both of you have asked the same question. I think both sides are quite clear about each other's positions on such issues. The purpose and objective of the summit is to deepen understanding across a whole range of issues that we have on India-China relations. India-China relations are not predicated on a single issue. They range on everything from the issue relating to historical problems like the boundary to the current cooperation we have in the international and regional sphere. So what I had to say with regard to the issue of terrorism or whether on Pakistan, I have already said. I think it is very evident what our position is on both issues. As far as the Consulate General in Chennai is concerned, as you know, we have an MOU which has been signed earlier to open a to give them permission to open a Consulate General here, and for us to open a Consulate General in one of the Chinese cities. The discussions on the specifics is underway. It will obviously also depend on when both sides want to establish the Consulate General, but there is already an agreement in principle. Therefore, there was no need for the leaders to discuss. The agreement in principle has already been signed.
Thank you.
मनीष झा हूँ TV9 भारतवर्ष से, और जैसा कि आपने अपने ब्रीफिंग में बताया भी कि चीन के राष्ट्रपति ने बताया कि इमरान खान का विजिट हुआ था और उसके बारे में उन्होंने कुछ शेयर किया, तो प्राइम मिनिस्टर का क्या रिएक्शन था, अगर आप इसके बारे में कुछ डिटेल कर सकें।
या प्रणय।
सर, प्रणय उपाध्याय, एबीपी न्यूज से। सर, पहला तो वुहान में जिस तरीके से तय हुआ था कि दोनों देश मिलकर किसी तीसरे देश के अंदर प्रोजेक्ट चलाएंगे, तो क्या उस प्रक्रिया को आगे बढ़ाने पे कोई बात हुई है? और दूसरा मामला कि आपने जिस तरह जिक्र किया कि टेररिज्म से लेके एक दूसरे की सेंसिटिविटीज का ध्यान रखने के बारे में सहमति बनी है, तो क्या आगे ऐसा कोई एश्योरेंस चाइनीज प्रेसिडेंट की तरफ से मिला कि एनएसजी से लेके यूएन सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल से लेके और जगहों पर जिस तरीके से असहज स्थिति भारत और चीन के संबंधों में आई है, वैसा वाकया आगे नहीं होगा और चाइना पाकिस्तान इकोनॉमिक कॉरिडोर के इशू पे भी वो भारत के जो हित हैं और भारत की जो चिंताएं हैं उनका ध्यान रखेंगे?
जी, इधर
Jagannathan from INS. Also, issue of Huawei are discussed at the meeting, and you said that the decisions will be formalized and actions will be taken. How long it will take? Can you give a time frame on the decisions taken on the summit?
थैंक यू मनीष जी और प्रणय, आपने जो सवाल पूछा है मैंने शायद उसका उत्तर ऑलरेडी मैं दे चुका हूं, क्योंकि पाकिस्तान के प्रधानमंत्री ने अभी चीन की यात्रा की है, तो इस बारे में राष्ट्रपति शी ने प्रधानमंत्री को बताया, प्रधानमंत्री ने सुन लिया। जहां थर्ड कंट्री प्रोजेक्ट कंपनीज, प्राइवेट सेक्टर, पब्लिक सेक्टर तीसरे देश में काम कर सकते हैं। जैसे मैंने कहा, ये मैकेनिज्म का उद्देश्य है ट्रेड इन गुड्स, सर्विसेज एंड इन्वेस्टमेंट और मैन्युफैक्चरिंग पार्टनरशिप्स भी। तो अभी ये क्या शेप लेगा, ये तो दोनों दोनों डेलीगेशन मिलने के बाद ही पता चलेगा। एज फार एज योर क्वेश्चन इज कंसर्न सर, द इशू ऑफ Huawei or 5G was not discussed between the two leaders. As far as the time frame is concerned, obviously the leaders have now left it to the official level to work out the exact times, dates, agenda and scope of all the guess that the Prime Minister expects us to do this before the next informal summit. So we are looking at a compressed time frame of certainly less than 1 year. Less than 1 year, because the next summit, yes.
Yes, please.
Sir, I am Prashant from Asianet News. On RCEP, can you elaborate what was discussed between the two leaders? And also there were some reports that opposition leaders were not allowed to meet the Chinese president. Can you clarify?
Yeah, Manas.
So it is Manas from PTI, Press Trust of India. Sir, you said that in fact both sides agreed to enhance cooperation in dealing with the challenge of terrorism in the region. So what are the areas we are looking at to cooperate with each other in tackling terrorism? And second point, the summit was taking place actually under the shadow of Kashmir. Both sides hardened their position just days ahead of his arrival here. So what is the single biggest outcome of the summit here in Mahabalipuram?
Manas, I think I have given you 6 or 7 points in my summing up on what the outcomes of the summit were. As far as terrorism is concerned, I have already said what I had to. I have nothing further to add. As far as the RCEP is concerned, again, as I said, the principal point of the Prime Minister is that in any free trade agreement, it is important to have a balanced agreement which involves not only trade in goods, which is bringing duties down, but also in services and in investment. And this was the point the Prime Minister made to the Chinese President. Equally, the President of China accepted that there are concerns, and he said he would take them into account. Beyond this, it is for negotiators to go into the details of RCEP. The Prime Minister and the President don't do that. As far as your question regarding whether opposition leaders were allowed to meet the Chinese leader or not, I wish to remind you that this is not a formal summit. In a formal summit, which normally happens in Delhi, which involves a formal welcome ceremony, formal talks, and other elements which are mandatory, including the visit to Mahatma Gandhi's Samadhi. On such occasions, meetings are arranged at the request of the dignitary on other political leaders. This is an informal summit. The objective of the informal summit is to build leadership relations between the Prime Minister and the President. It is not a part of the elements of an informal summit for there to be interaction with other political leaders. So this is not a departure from practice. It is in an informal summit, the elements are different from the elements of a formal structured summit.
So, विजय लक्ष्मी हूँ मैं इंडिया टीवी से। सर, आप जो ट्रेड के लिए नए मैकेनिज्म की बात करें, क्या कोई टाइमलाइन उसके लिए डिसाइड की गई है कि कब तक वो मैकेनिज्म और क्या रूपरेखा होगी? और दूसरा, क्लाइमेट चेंज पर आपने कहा बातचीत हुई, क्या कुछ कॉन्क्रीट मेजर्स किस तरह के दोनों देश लेंगे, इसको लेकर अगर आप थोड़ा इलैबोरेट कर पाएं, क्या उस पर कोई चर्चा हुई?
जी, विजय लक्ष्मी, लास्ट क्वेश्चन। आगे।
So obviously Prime Minister Modi and Chinese President have a very good personal rapport, but going by the recent experiences, when it comes to the Chinese government, it doesn't always translate into action in terms of their stand towards India in many issues, particularly with respect to the Kashmir thing. When that issue wasn't even raised in this meeting, what is the biggest takeaway in your view in that sense?
विजय लक्ष्मी जी, आपने जो कहा ट्रेड के इशू पे टाइमलाइंस अभी तय नहीं हुए हैं, लेकिन जहां तक क्योंकि अच्छा है और मुझे पूरा विश्वास है कि जिस तरह से चीन के राष्ट्रपति जी ने कहा कि वो हमारी समस्याएं समझते हैं और बातचीत करने के लिए तैयार है, मुझे पूरा विश्वास है कि ये मैकेनिज्म जल्द ही तय होगा। लेकिन किस डेट तक होगा और कहां पहला मीटिंग होगा, ये मैं अभी नहीं कह सकता हूं। क्लाइमेट चेंज पे बहुत जनरल डिस्कशन हुआ दोनों लीडर्स के बीच में। दोनों ने कहा कि ये हमारे दोनों देशों के लिए चैलेंज है और दुनिया के लिए भी एक चुनौती है। तो किस तरह से दोनों देश इस पे काम कर सकते हैं, वो बातचीत के अंतर्गत वो उसको हम आगे ले जाएंगे। As far as your question is concerned, sir, the good personal rapport was, I think, fairly evident in the visuals, and this rapport has been established in the 18 meetings that Prime Minister has had, formal, informal, in the sidelines of multilateral meetings, informal bilateral summits, and so on. Now, you mentioned that even if the personal rapport is good, there are issues in the relationship. The fact of the matter is that in all relationships, there are issues. And the closer or bigger the relationship is, the more likely there will be issues. The fact that there are issues does not detract from the positive effect that good interpersonal relations at the leadership level have in building the larger relationship. So I think we have to look at this in perspective. Some of the issues are issues which predate these two leaders. These are historical issues. But we also need to bear in mind that the way this relationship has been managed by our leaderships has ensured that there is no fundamental disruption, that there is a forward-looking trajectory. And to that extent, this informal summit contributed to that process.
So, Raja from Business Line. So this is in the backdrop of this very escalating China-US relationship, trade relationship. How significant is this informal summit when it comes to China-India relationship related? You did mention some of the trade-related issues, but going forward, how do you feel these issues?
Thank you. I'll take one more. Yes, please. This is Sheikh Maidin from Dinamala Tamil newspaper. Sir, can you say that what is the reason behind selection of Mamallapuram for this second informal summit? And also, what are the plans we have to develop relationship, the century-old relationship between the Tamil Nadu and China also? And third one, do we have a discussions about river and border issues with China and India?
Thank you. Raja, the India-China trade relationship has no bearing or direct bearing or connection with what is happening between the China and the United States. They are in the midst of a discussion, and I understand there is some news today. I have only seen news reports of the possibility of them reaching some kind of an understanding or an agreement. We are, of course, awaiting the details. But as far as we are concerned, there is a very significant market in China. The Chinese have a significant market in India. We need to find ways in which we can enhance exports and in which China can increase imports from India, and that is the objective of this mechanism. I appreciate the question regarding Mamallapuram, and I actually want to clarify that I am somewhat surprised at reports in the media that we were looking at alternative sites. Neither is there any public statement on the record, nor are there government sources which claimed any other venue than Chennai. The Prime Minister was very clear right from the outset, and he had given instructions to all of us that this venue of the summit will be in Chennai and in Mamallapuram, because it is a World Heritage Site and because Tamil Nadu has a long-standing historical and trading and cultural ties with China. As far as the initiatives between Tamil Nadu and China are concerned, we will be issuing a press release which will have more details on some of what I have said, including specifically on the proposals the Prime Minister made and President Xi Jinping has accepted in that regard.
River and water.
On the border issue, I've already said the leaders have directed the special representatives on both sides to continue their discussions and have a meeting. On the river water issue, as you know, we have a partial understanding that China will give data in the flood season in respect of certain major rivers. Our effort has been to try and expand the scope of this. We will continue to discuss that with the Chinese side. And this is something where we have an official annual mechanism for discussions on sharing of information relating to cross-border rivers. I just also want to mention, because you spoke of Mamallapuram, that the External Affairs Ministry and the Government of India again greatly appreciate the very solid support we got from the Government of Tamil Nadu for this summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, friends. We are hard pressed for time, but thank you all for joining.
All right, so that was the press briefing by India's Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale there, where he highlighted the several issues that were discussed as a part of this informal meeting, this informal summit between the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and also the Chinese President Xi Jinping. So this, of course, has been hailed as taking the relationship forward from the spirit of Wuhan to the Chennai Connect. And in our studios, we have Ambassador Arun Singh, who's joining us. So let me begin by asking you this. You know, a lot of commentators have said that the 21st century belongs to Asia, and for this to happen, the cooperation between China and India has to go forward. Is this a building block in that direction? Are India and China coming out? Are they thrashing out their differences? And although there are differences, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, we are trying to ensure through these mechanisms that these differences do not turn into disputes.
If India and China are to cooperate in the framework of 21st century to belong to Asia, clearly this kind of an interaction, these kind of discussions, summits would be important, but we are far away from that as of now because of the differences. And looking at the briefing that the Foreign Secretary did, several aspects stood out to me. One, a reiteration of the thrust since Wuhan to keep these discussions focused at the strategic level, building a new understanding. Therefore, the areas of differences were really skirted, at least in terms of public projection that has been done. There was a clear reiteration that there was no discussion on Jammu and Kashmir or China's
position. That's the elephant in the room, because let's face it, this meeting is taking place in a context. Now, just before Xi Jinping came to India, the Pakistani Prime Minister was in China, and he was having discussions with him. And one would have thought that the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, on which China has been fairly vocal about, and Pakistan is trying to leverage its all-weather friendship with China to try and internationalize this issue, one would have thought that this issue would have been brought up. But the Foreign Secretary there said that this issue was never brought up and it was not discussed. Are you surprised?
I'm not really surprised, because I think the takeaway from that is that India probably recognizes that on this issue, the Chinese position cannot be changed now. And therefore, there was no point getting into it, and reiterate the Indian position that Jammu and Kashmir is an internal matter for India. Therefore, we don't need to discuss it with anybody. And even in terms of the visit of the Pakistan Prime Minister, if you saw, the Foreign Secretary clarified that President Xi spoke about the visit of the Pakistan Prime Minister, and that the Indian Prime Minister listened to him. And didn't indicate the Indian Prime Minister engaging with that, at least in terms of the public projection. Therefore, that position is being preserved, that this is our internal matter, we don't need to discuss it with anybody. And perhaps, as I said, a recognition that on this issue, China is not yet ready to move. But I think there are several important takeaways from the briefing that the Foreign Secretary did, especially on trade and economic issues. An assertion that China is willing to show more attention to India's concerns on the trade imbalance, that they have agreed to set up a new mechanism on the Indian side led by the finance minister to deal with trade, investment and services. They would also look at manufacturing partnerships, and that's important because China is now a global leader in manufacturing, and in India the manufacturing sector has slowed down. People talk in terms of global value chains, and also if we are looking at membership of RCEP and looking at freer trade within that framework, then manufacturing partnerships, global value chains would be an important dimension.
You know, on the issue of RCEP, do you think China would want India to be on board the RCEP? Because it is trying to forge these long-term future mechanisms where it somehow wants to, try and ensure that it immunizes itself from the kind of shocks that it got through the trade wars that have been unleashed by Donald Trump in the last 2 years. Is this one of the reasons as to why RCEP is so important for the Chinese vision to try and get India on board?
Many have argued that China may not be too unhappy if India doesn't join RCEP, because that, as you have also indicated, that enables China to dominate that structure even more. But many other participants in RCEP don't necessarily want to come under Chinese domination economically, and they want other alternatives.
But is that a real fear that, if India were to be a part of RCEP, then one of the sectors that is being spoken about which could take a big hit in India is that of the agricultural and dairy sector?
So those issues, I think the Indian negotiators will have to work out. And as you've seen in the reports, the Indian Commerce Minister will be going soon for the next round of level. We need to protect our interests. What are the areas where we can gain? How do we get a balance, as the Foreign Secretary mentioned, in terms of also facilities in the area of services? So those are things. But again, another thing I noticed was that the Foreign Secretary referred to agreement that the two countries would engage more on defense and security, and that the Indian Raksha Mantri would visit China soon for this. So that again is important. Let's see how it progresses. A lot of emphasis on the people-to-people dimension. So broadly, one can say that the effort through this mechanism continues to be, as at Wuhan, to try and build more intense discussion, a new framework for understanding, see if it enables better handling of differences, but a realization that the differences are there to stay, and you have to work around them over a period of time. So I would say that's the broad takeaway.
And also the fact that, we just saw a little while back the Chinese president depart from Chennai. His next stop is a state visit to Nepal. And in diplomacy, pretty much what is said and what is unsaid is sometimes something that communicates more. This will be the first state visit by a Chinese head of state to Nepal in 23 years. Last time round, a Chinese head of state was in the year 1996. There was this string of pearls theory that was talked about earlier. Would we, by looking at the manner in which China has been moving and making, increasing its influence in places such as Nepal and in Bhutan, would we call this a kind of a Himalayan embrace that China wants to exert onto India?
Look, China's economic strength, military strength has been increasing. And as countries' economic and military health increases, their regional and global footprint increases. So at one level, it is inevitable that China is going to have an increasing presence, not just in Southeast Asia, but also in South Asia and the Indian Ocean region. And they have focused a lot on Nepal, building more cooperation with Nepal. They have now leased the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka for 99 years. They have a facility in Djibouti. They have supplied submarines to Bangladesh. They are building facilities in Bangladesh. They are looking at building a facility in Gwadar. They're doing the China-Pakistan economic corridor. So that's something that China has been doing. And in some ways...
But do you think India should be concerned? The fact that China now wants to pump in $2.34 billion in Nepal. That's a huge investment.
Well, it's not enough just to be concerned. It's a fact of life. They're going to do it. And just as India looks for autonomy in its relations, all our neighbors will be hedging in their relationships. And so they have a certain deep linkage with India. But when they see other alternatives, they would want to utilize that. So that's just a fact of life. And you have to see how do you work to protect your interests. And the most effective way to protect your interests is not by being concerned, but by increasing your economic capacity and your ability to link with countries in the region and give them opportunities for economic growth and development. So that's the way forward.
An interesting and important point that you've put through. And meanwhile, I'm told that we are also joined in by senior journalist Atul Aneja, who is joining us. Mr. Aneja, this is a summit that is informal summit that has just concluded in Chennai. We saw Prime Minister Narendra Modi and also President Xi Jinping interacting with each other there for almost about 6 hours. If I can begin by asking you, what are your big takeaways from this informal summit that took place in Chennai and in Mamallapuram?
Well, I think it's important to realize the immediate context of the summit, informal summit. Just before President Xi left, there was this visit by Imran Khan of Pakistan, along with the military chief, Pakistani military chief General Bajwa, and the ISI chief General Faiz Hamid. And the meeting, in one way, was in the context of August 5. I mean, I can't say that the two were delinked. The decision which India took on August 5 and the meeting which took place over here. What was also happening here for the first time, which I picked up, was that the Quad formation, especially raising the Quad level of discussion at the UN General Assembly sidelines, from the Joint Secretary level to the Foreign Minister level was a matter of concern. And perhaps there was that Quad element entered into the China-Pakistan equation, which for me, I thought was something which India should be pretty concerned about. So in that context, when President Xi goes to India, I think it's exceptionally important that the course correction takes place in the India-China equation. And that course correction cannot come at the level of officials, that can come only at the highest level. And therefore, this meeting has been of utmost importance to give new direction to India-China ties.
Right.
And I think the reference by Foreign Secretary that the Chinese president spoke about his meeting with the Pakistani Prime Minister is an interesting point, because the Chinese did their talking with the Pakistanis before coming here and probably had a message to convey to India. And that, I presume, is a part which would feed into the course correction which is required on the India-China track. Course correction, I mean, in the larger strategic context of the Quad and the China-Pakistan equation. So therefore, this has been a very extremely important meeting. Right. There are other points which Arun has referred, which are exceptionally important, including the cultural component of it, because if you can see that Indian soft power has been gradually increasing in China, especially connecting the millennials of both countries through Bollywood, through movies, and quite honestly, the phenomena of this TikTok, the short video, has been a raging hit in China. For example, I work with a translator, and to give you an example, she saw Golgappas being made in some Indian street and was very curious what this is about. And she was home, and my wife was demonstrating to her how this can be done. It's a small incident, but it really shows that Indian soft power is going in and making a big dent, not just in movies, but in fed into the statement which was released. We just talk of greater people-to-people exchanges. Finally, if you break it down, it comes to issues like this. So I think it's been an exceptionally important course correction meeting, and it's given some specific directions in all areas. Absolutely. And, the mechanisms are most important. I just want to wind up with one final point. Before the Chinese president's departure, the brief...